Friday practice in Melbourne is over and the fastest driver of the day was Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. But what did we learn? Well, in today's video, that's what I'm going to be talking about as we do a data analysis from practice. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get straight into the video. As usual, I'll be talking about the top teams later on, so please do stick around for that. Yep. Friday is over and it was an interesting practice session as the teams are fully getting to grips with their cars for the 2025 F1 season, and we saw a number of errors from the drivers as they were pushing the limits of the Melbourne circuit. The additional gravel at turn 6 saw plenty of use, so much so that I anticipate that we may see some of it get glued down before Saturday. We also saw George Russell in the Mercedes have two big spins, which almost ended in the wall, and Oliver Behrman hit the wall hard in FP1, and he couldn't even go out in FP2. The weather in practice was very different to what is expected for both qualifying and absolutely what is expected for the race. Practice temperatures were more or less what we would usually expect. However, Saturday is expected to be very hot, as temperatures are set to be well above 30 degrees, and the race is going to be wet. It also means that the teams have a big level of compromise to make. Do they set things up for qualifying in the very warm temperatures, or do they prepare for a wet Grand Prix? The fastest time was set by Charles Leclerc, and that was a 1:16.439, and that time was faster than the time also set by Charles Leclerc in FP3 last year, which was a 1:16.714, showing the rate of development in Formula 1. Let's compare then the fastest lap in FP1 set by Lando Norris to Charles Leclerc in FP2, so we can see how things changed between each session. And when you look at these two lap times, you can see how the circuits had evolved between each session. In FP2, Charles Leclerc carried a lot more speed into turn 1, braking later and carrying more minimum apex speed. The minimum apex speed of Charles Leclerc was 186 km per hour, whereas Lando Norris only carried about 179 km per hour. Not only that, but Leclerc in FP2 was also faster at getting back to full speed on the exits as grip levels had increased. The same can be seen at turn 6 as well. However, after this, we see how McLaren were running with less downforce than Ferrari, as Lando Norris hits 324 km per hour down the straight, whereas Charles Leclerc is only able to hit 319 km per hour. It will be interesting to see if McLaren increase the levels of downforce with the rain expected. Overall, Charles Leclerc's lap time was 8 tenths faster in FP2 compared to Lando Norris from FP1. I expect that there is still plenty more time to come though between now and qualifying. So we've seen how the times changed from FP1 to FP2, but let's now take a look at the top speed that the teams were able to reach. And what can we see here? Well, what we can see is that the Alpine team is the fastest car in a straight line currently, potentially showing that they have the least amount of downforce on the car out of anyone, which could explain why some of their struggles through the corners, with Jack Doohan and Gasly both having off tracks a few times. Both drivers topped the top speed as they hit 329 km per hour. Red Bull were also pretty fast down the straights with Max Verstappen as he reached 327 km per hour. The slowest car in a straight line was the Mercedes as they were only able to reach 321 km per hour. I have a feeling that Mercedes probably had things turned down a bit more than anyone else, which would make sense given where they finished in FP2. I just want to say if you are enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get back to the video and let's talk about Racing Bulls and Williams. For Racing Bulls, they had a fantastic first day, and I think they surprised a lot of people with their performance in FP2, as Yuki Tsunoda was 4th fastest and Isaac Hadjar was 6th fastest. Both Racing Bulls cars were ahead of both Red Bull cars, showing that they currently are looking very good right now. Another midfield team that was very impressive today was Williams, who looked fantastic in FP1 and overall were pretty strong in FP2, if not as impressive as Racing Bulls over one lap. But who looked stronger on the race runs? Well, to find out, let's compare the times of Carlos Sainz to Yuki Tsunoda. Apologies that the colours are pretty similar, But when we look at these longer runs from practice, you can see that in general, the Williams is the faster car pretty much consistently, as Carlos Sainz averages lap times of a 1:22.2, whereas Tsunoda averages a 1:22.5. This could be fuel related, but right now it looks like Williams is really looking like an impressive package. Let's not also forget Alpine, who might still have more time in their pocket if they increase the downforce a little bit. For Mercedes then, it was a very quiet day for them really, and we didn't see a great deal from them, at least in my opinion. We saw two big errors from George Russell, both in FP1 and FP2. The incident in FP1 almost ended up with a trip into the barrier, and in FP2, with the fastest laps, Russell was 10th fastest and Antonelli was only 16th. However, as I mentioned earlier, Mercedes likely had things turned down more than their rivals, so you can't really look at one-lap runs. In the longer runs, it's also pretty difficult to judge Mercedes, as Russell and Antonelli both did long runs on the hard tyres, and well, they were the only drivers on the hard tyres. That being said, the long runs of Russell compared to Lando Norris does show that the times are very comparable. However, I do think at Melbourne, the harder tyres are the better race tyres, so there is still work to do for the Silver Arrows before qualifying and the Grand Prix. For Red Bull then, it was an interesting day, and looking at it, it looks as though Verstappen and Lawson, at least right now, have different specs of cars, which you can see here when you look at the images of Verstappen and now Liam Lawson. You can see that actually they have different specs of front wings and noses, and well, for Liam Lawson, there is still a lot to do, as Liam was 17th fastest, and Verstappen was 7th fastest. In the longer runs between the two drivers, you can see that Verstappen is simply faster than Lawson, but as I mentioned earlier, they don't currently have the same spec of car. For Liam Lawson, he just needs to keep his head down and try and get some points on the board. Whereas for Max Verstappen, he is looking alright, but he will definitely be hoping that the Grand Prix is wet so Verstappen can do some of that magic that he tends to do in wet races. For Ferrari then, it was a strong first day for the season, and it looked like in dry conditions they are definitely at least the second fastest car, and could even be fastest in certain circumstances. Charles Leclerc over one lap was the fastest driver of the day. Teammate Lewis Hamilton was a bit slower over one lap, as his fastest lap was 4/10 slower. But over the race runs, Lewis is a lot more comparable to Charles Leclerc, and things for both drivers is looking very positive in my opinion. Let's compare the long runs of Charles Leclerc to Lando Norris, and when you do this, it still looks pretty positive for Ferrari, as things between the two cars is pretty similar. It looks like currently McLaren just has the edge over the Ferrari team, but it has to be said, as the run continued, Charles Leclerc and Ferrari started to come back to McLaren, and things between them is very close. For qualifying, I think Ferrari could be in a great place to actually take the fight to McLaren. In the race runs, if it is dry, then we could see a titanic battle. If it is wet though, Ferrari will need to show that they have actually improved in the strategy department, as wet races mean strategy is all important. Finally, for McLaren then, it looks as though overall they still pretty much have the best car, as Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri had a very strong day, both over one lap and in the long runs, as they were second and third fastest, with Piastri being the faster driver of the two over one lap. In the long runs then, let's compare the runs of Piastri to Norris, and with Piastri in white and Norris in papaya, and when you look at these two lap times, it looks as though Norris right now has the edge over his teammate by a couple of tenths of a second. That being said, Piastri is still pretty close, and with this in mind, I expect a very close fight between the two McLaren drivers and also the Ferrari cars. That is, of course, if the Grand Prix is wet. So, with that in mind then, what are my predictions for qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix? Well, I think in P5 it will be Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari, P4 will be Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, P3 will be Oscar Piastri in the McLaren, P2 is Lando Norris in the McLaren, and I'm going to go for Charles Leclerc to take the first pole of the season. Although that could be the Ferrari bias in me hoping that is the result. But the question is, what do you guys think will happen? In the comment section down below, please do let me know. And as always, comment, leave a like and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.